A mail-order bride arrived in a wheelchair. Rancher carried her across his threshold. The telegram came on a Thursday. I remember because I'd spent the morning pulling a calf that didn't want to come into this world, and my arms were still sore when Decker from the post office rode out and handed me the folded yellow paper without a word, like he already knew what was inside and didn't want any part of whatever it started. I stood in the yard and read it twice. Miss Elspeth Crane, arriving Colburn Station, Saturday the 14th, 2:47 afternoon train. That was it, no pleasantries. No word about the 6 months of letters we'd traded. Nothing about the fact that in every one of those letters she'd said she was healthy and able-bodied and ready to work alongside a man. Just the date, the time, the station. I folded the telegram and put it in my chest pocket, where it sat against my ribs for the next 2 days like a coal that hadn't gone cold. You want to know what kind of man writes to a matchmaking service at 51 years old? I'll tell you plain. Not a desperate one, not a sad one. Just a man who'd buried his wife 6 years back and spent the years since running a 300-acre cattle operation by himself, and one afternoon stood in his kitchen looking at the single cup on the shelf and thought, that's not how it's supposed to end. Not like this. Not a man alone with one cup. My name is Earl Giddens. I run the Giddens Ranch 6 miles north of Colburn in the Basin country where the hills go flat before they go big again heading east toward the mountains. I've run cattle on that land since I was 23. My father ran it before me. The house is stone, the barn is plank, and the well has never gone dry in 40 years. It's not a pretty life, but it's a solid one, and I'd made it that way with my hands. What I couldn't make was company. So I wrote to a service out of St. Louis that matched up men in the territories with women back east. I wrote 3 letters total before Elspeth Crane wrote back. The other 2 women hadn't answered. Elspeth answered in 4 days in handwriting so clear and level it looked like something printed, and she wrote about herself the way a person talks when they're not trying to impress you. She'd been a schoolteacher in Ohio. Her father had died 2 years before and left her with nothing. She was 38, she said. She could cook, sew, tend a garden, keep accounts. She wasn't afraid of work or weather. She wanted a real life, not a city one. We wrote for 6 months. By the 5th month I knew I liked her. Not in any complicated way, in the way a man likes a person who tells him the truth and doesn't put on a show about it. She never mentioned the chair. The train was 11 minutes late. I know because I stood on that platform for 11 minutes with my hat in my hands and my good shirt already damp at the collar from the August heat, watching the tracks go empty toward the pass, and I counted the minutes by the station clock the same way I count the seconds before a storm hits. Something about a man with nothing to do but wait. When the train came in and the passengers started stepping down onto the platform, I stood to one side and watched. A family, 2 men in suits, a woman in black with a little boy, and then a porter came off first, stepping backward, holding something, another porter behind him. They were carrying a chair down the metal steps, a wooden chair with wheels, and the woman sitting in it had her hands folded in her lap and her chin level. And she was looking straight ahead, not at the crowd, not at the station, just straight ahead like she was looking at something none of the rest of us could see. Elspeth Crane was not a small woman. She was broad-shouldered, brown-haired, with a face that had some sun on it and hadn't been softened by anything easy. She was dressed well but not expensively. Her hands were folded on a small bag in her lap. And when the porters set the chair on the platform and she finally turned her eyes and found me standing there, because I suppose she knew what a rancher waiting alone looked like. She held my gaze for a long moment without flinching. I put my hat back on my head, walked over. "Miss Crane," I said. "Mr. Giddens," she said. Her voice was steady, level, exactly like her handwriting. I squatted down so we were eye level. I didn't do it to be dramatic about it. It just seemed like the right way to talk to a person. "I should have told you," she said. "I know that." "Yes," I said. She waited. I could see her bracing herself for what came next, what arrangement I'd make to send her back, probably. 6 months of letters, and she'd come 2,000 miles, and she was bracing herself for it. I straightened up, looked around the platform, found the 2 porters standing to the side watching us with the careful nothing expression of men who have seen too many arrivals go wrong. "You bring much," I said. She blinked at 2 trunks. "I've got a wagon," I said. "We'll get your trunks loaded. You hungry?" Bessie McAllister runs the hotel dining room and she does a good roast on Saturdays. She looked at me for a moment, really looked at me. The way a person does when they're trying to figure out if you mean what you're saying or if there's something else underneath it. There wasn't anything underneath it. I meant it plain. Yes, she said, I'm hungry. We ate at Bessie's. I watched Elspeth navigate the chair through the narrow space between the tables without asking for help and without making a show of not asking. She managed it the way she managed everything I'd see her manage over the weeks to come, with a kind of flat efficiency. No complaints, no drama, just the job done and move on. She ate a full plate of pot roast and told me about the train from Cincinnati to St. Louis where she'd changed lines. She was a good talker, not a chatterbox, a good talker, which is different. She had opinions. She said things straight. When I said something she disagreed with, she said so, which I appreciated more than I let on right then. I watched Harlan Greer from the hardware store pass by the window twice, slow, craning his neck to see. Colburn was a town of maybe 400 people. I knew what tomorrow's conversation at the feed store would be. I didn't care about it. I'd never much cared what Colburn thought. After dinner, I walked her out to the wagon. The street had a step down from the boardwalk, and she looked at it and then at the wagon 20 feet away, and I could see her calculating it. All right, I said, and I picked her up out of the chair, bag and all, and carried her to the wagon seat and set her there, and then went back for the chair and folded it and put it in the bed with the trunks. She didn't say anything when I put her down on the wagon seat, didn't thank me or apologize or make a remark about it. She settled her skirts and looked out at the street while I climbed up on the other side, and that suited me fine. We drove the 6 miles to the ranch in the late afternoon light, and she asked me about the land. What I ran, how many head, where the water was. She asked smart questions. I answered them. The chair didn't go up the porch steps. I hadn't thought about that on the ride out, and when we pulled up to the house I thought about it then. 3 stone steps up to the porch and the door. I set the brake and climbed down and went around to her side. I can, she started. I know you can, I said, but you don't have to. I lifted her out of the wagon seat. She was solid, a real weight, and she put one arm over my shoulder and held the bag with the other hand. And I carried her up those 3 steps and across the porch and through the front door of the Giddens ranch house without putting her down. I set her in the big chair by the fireplace, the one my wife used to sit in. It felt right and strange at the same time, but mostly right. She looked around the room. The stone walls, the plank floor, the iron stove, the shelf with the single cup on it. It's a good house, she said. It is, I said. That was the first night. Here is what the next month looked like. I'll tell it plain. I built a ramp over the porch steps that second Sunday. Not a fancy one, raw lumber, good angle, solid enough for the chair's wheels. Took me most of the morning. She watched me do it from inside through the window, and when I came in for the noon meal she didn't mention it. Which was right. It wasn't done for praise. It was done because it needed doing. She took over the kitchen. I don't know how to put it another way. I had been making my own meals for 6 years, and I was competent at it, but not much more than that. And the first meal she cooked, a beef stew with some root vegetables she'd found in the cellar, was so much better than anything I'd made that I ate 2 bowls and didn't say a word about it because what was there to say? She could see I appreciated it. The ledger books were a mess. 6 years of my own keeping, which means 6 years of the writing of a man who'd rather be outside than in. She sat at the kitchen table with those books spread out and worked through them in 4 days, and then told me quietly what I owed and to who and in what order. And I sat across from her, and listened and nodded and thought that this was the most useful thing anyone had done for me in years. She couldn't get to the barn. The ground was uneven and the chair bogged in the dirt. So I built a plank path from the house to the barn door, rough-cut boards laid flat, which she tested one morning without telling me she was going to do it. And when I came back from the south pasture, she was inside the barn talking to the gray mare. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a minute. She had one hand up and the mare had her nose in it, and Elspeth was saying something too quiet for me to catch. I didn't ask what she'd said. Some things aren't for asking. We were not married. I want to be clear about that in the telling of it. We were at the ranch together, a man and a woman who'd agreed by letter to see if a life together was possible, and for that first month we were finding out if it was. She had the back bedroom. I had my room. We were decent to each other and honest with each other, and sometimes we sat on the porch in the evenings when the heat broke and I smoked a pipe and she mended something, and that was all. But something was building. I could feel it the way you can feel a change in the air before weather comes, not dramatic, just a shift in the pressure of things. The third week, Hick Tolliver rode out. Hick Tolliver was a man who'd tried to buy my water rights twice in 5 years, and both times I'd sent him off without them. He wasn't a bad man exactly, but he was a calculating one, and he had a way of making what he wanted sound like sense. He came out on a Tuesday and tied his horse at the post, and came up the plank path to the porch, and found Elspeth there working on a piece of harness I'd brought her to restitch. He didn't talk to her like she was a person to reckon with, I'll say that. He talked to her the way a man does when he's already decided what a woman is worth and what she isn't. Polite enough, but looking past her, asked for me. She told him I was in the south pasture. He said he'd wait. He waited on the porch steps. Didn't offer to move so she could get the chair past him easily. Not a dramatic meanness, just an oversight that wasn't quite an oversight. When I came back and he'd gone, he'd come about the water rights again. Same offer, same answer. Elspeth was still on the porch. She didn't complain about Hick Tolliver. She just said, "Is that man always going to come around wanting things?" "Probably," I said. "Then you should know I'm not going to be in the way when he does," she said. "I'll be right here." I looked at her. She had the piece of harness in her lap, and she was looking at me level, the way she'd looked at me on the platform that first day. I didn't know what to do with that right then, so I just said, "That's good to know," and went in to wash my hands for supper. But I thought about it. I thought about it for 3 days. The trouble with Decker's son came in the 4th week. Young Cole Decker, Decker's boy from the post office, 17 years old and full of the particular confidence of a boy who hasn't been knocked down enough yet, rode out one afternoon when I was at the barn, and I guess he thought he was being clever. I heard him before I saw him. Heard his voice from the barn with that performative sweetness some young men put on with women when they think no man is close enough to hear. "Must be lonesome out here," he was saying, "with a man who's got nothing to offer a woman who can't even." I came out of the barn. Cole Decker saw me and stopped talking. He was still on his horse, which was the right place for him. I walked over to his horse slow, and I looked up at him, and I didn't say much. I said, "Get off my land and don't come back." His face went red. He looked past me at Elspeth on the porch. "Just talking," he said. "You're done talking," I said. He left. I went back to the barn. Didn't make a production of it. When I came up to the house at supper, Elspeth was at the stove, and she didn't bring it up, and neither did I. But that night after we'd eaten, and she was at the table with the ledger books, and I was cleaning the sharps on the other side of the room, she said without looking up, "You didn't have to do that." "No," I said, "I know I didn't." She looked at me then, for a long moment. "Earl," she said. It was the first time she'd used my name without the Mr. in front of it. "Yes," I said. "Thank you," she said, and went back to the books. Here is the thing about a man who's been alone a long time. He forgets. Not that he was lonely, he never quite forgets that. He forgets what it felt like to matter to someone specific. Not in a general way, the way a man can matter to his cattle or his land. In a particular way. To one person who looks at him and sees exactly him, the actual man, not what he represents or what he can do, but the particular form he takes in the world. I had forgotten what that felt like. I started to remember it that 4th week. It wasn't one thing. It was the small accretion of things. The way she'd have coffee on when I came in from the early morning check without my having asked. The way she asked my opinion on the accounts, not for show, but because she actually wanted to know what I thought. The way she'd look up when I came in from outside, a quick look, then back to what she was doing, but a real look, the kind that's checking to see if you're all right, not just registering your presence. One night I sat down on the porch steps and I was tired, a real tired, the kind that's in the bones, and she wheeled out and sat beside me in the chair and said nothing for a long time, and I said nothing. And the night came down over the valley, and somewhere in the east there was heat lightning going off in the clouds without any sound, and that was enough. Just that. That was enough. I asked her to marry me on a Sunday morning in September. 5 weeks after she'd arrived. I didn't make a production of it. I was at the table with my coffee, and she was at the window looking out at the morning, and I said, "I think we should get married." She kept looking out the window for a moment. Then she said, "I think so too." That was it. That was the whole of it. We drove into Colburn the following Saturday and saw Judge Pemberton, who married us in his front room with his wife and the clerk as witnesses. It took about 8 minutes. Elspeth wore her good blue dress. I wore my good shirt. Afterward we ate at Bessie's again, the same pot roast, the same table, and Elspeth said that this seemed like a place we should come back to on the same day every year, and I said we would, and we did. Winter came hard that year. November brought snow that didn't stop for 4 days, and by the end of it the drifts against the north side of the barn were chest-high on me. I spent 2 weeks barely getting from the house to the barn and back. The cattle needed feeding, and the water troughs needed breaking every morning, and there were days I came in so cold my fingers wouldn't close properly. She was there, that's the whole of what I want to say about that winter. She was there. When I came in half frozen, she had something hot on the stove. When I sat down at the table so tired, I couldn't form a sentence she didn't ask me questions. She figured out how to manage the kitchen and the fire and the accounts and everything that needed managing from inside. And she didn't complain about the confinement. And when I had the strength to talk, she talked with me, and when I didn't, she didn't push. There was one bad night. A heifer was down in the far pasture, and I'd been out there for 3 hours in the dark and the cold before I got back to the house, and I came in and my right hand was wrong, not moving right, not feeling right, and I sat at the table and I put my head down and I was done. Just done, the way a man gets sometimes when the body says that's all. She came up beside me, the chair quiet on the floor. She took my hand in both of hers and held it, not rubbing it frantically, just holding it, steady and warm, and she said very quietly, "You're in here now. You're all right." And I was. I lifted my head after a while and looked at her, and she was looking at me the way, I don't have a word for it exactly, the way a person looks at something they've decided to keep. Not soft, not pitying, clear and decided and without any condition attached to it. I put my other hand over hers. "Good woman," I said, it was all I had. "Good man," she said, and meant it. Spring came. The valley went green the way it does, not gradually, but almost in a single week, like it had been waiting and then decided. The plank path from the house to the barn needed replacing where the frost had heaved it, and I pulled the old boards and put down new ones and made the path longer, extending it around the side of the barn so she could get to the south side where the sun hit in the afternoons. She found that on her own one April morning. I was mending fence on the near pasture, and I could see her from there, out on the new section of path in the sun, her face turned up. Something in me settled when I saw that, something that had been waiting to settle. Harlan Greer came in the store when I was in town for supplies that May, and he said, with the careful casualness of a man saying something he's thought about first, that it seemed like things had worked out well at the Giddens place. "They have," I said. He nodded. "People had their doubts," he said, "when she got off that train." "I know they did," I said. I paid for my supplies and put them in the wagon and drove home. When I came up the path, Elspeth was on the porch, the ledger book in her lap, and she looked up and said, "There's something wrong with the March figures. Come look." And I tied the horse and went up the ramp and sat beside her and looked at the figures, and she was right. There was something wrong with the March figures, and we worked it out together in about 20 minutes, and that was a good afternoon. What I want you to understand, if you're the kind of man who wonders about these things, and I think you might be, or you wouldn't have listened this far, is that what I got was not what I expected to get. I expected to get a helpmate, a woman to run a house and make it less lonely. That's what I wrote to the service for. I thought I was being practical. What I got was a woman who sized me up in 2 minutes on a train platform and decided I was worth the gamble, who made a home out of my house in about 3 weeks without making a sound about it, who kept the books straighter than I'd kept them in 6 years and didn't make me feel bad about that, who looked at me across a cold kitchen table in February when I had nothing left in me and said "good man" like she'd staked something on it. She had staked something on it, that's the thing. She'd come 2,000 miles and she didn't know what she was riding into, and she looked at the whole situation, the chair, the wheelchair, the uneven ground, the ranch and the work and the man standing on the platform not running away, and she made her decision. She made it clear and she made it permanent and she never revisited it. A man doesn't forget that. A man who's been forgotten, who's been overlooked, who's spent his years doing work that was necessary and decent and solid, and then had someone come along and look at that work and look at him and say, "Yes, that's the man I'm staying with." You don't forget that. I'm telling you this on a fall evening, the kind where the light goes long and golden across the valley, and the mountains in the east go purple. We've been married 11 years now. The ramp on the porch is solid. I rebuild it every few springs. The plank path goes all the way around the barn and extends to the kitchen garden she planted 4 years back, and the garden is something to see in summer. She's on the porch now. I can see her through the window. She's got the mending in her lap. There's always mending. And she's watching the light go off the mountains the way she does, that particular stillness she gets when she's watching something she finds worth watching. I'll go out there in a minute, pour 2 cups, take one to her, sit on the steps like I've done 1,000 evenings. She'll say something about the color of the sky or something she read or something that needs doing, and I'll answer her, and the evening will come down around us. That's the whole of it, really. That's what I wanted and what I have. A man with a good woman beside him and his house in order. His work done and his name meaning something in the valley. I picked her up and carried her across my threshold when she came, because it was right and because it was mine to do. And she's been carrying me ever since, in all the ways that don't show.